I'm Eva from The Charm of It, which is a video knitting podcast here on YouTube. And today I am filming a demonstration of how I knit stranded color work. This is at a reader request, and I just want to make it very clear, sorry, not a reader, a viewer, that there are all kinds of techniques to knit stranded color work, and they're all wonderful. So I am not saying that my way is the only way. I just thought I would go ahead and share. So here are the mittens that I'm currently working on. They're going to be matryoshki mittens. I've already finished the first one, so I thought I would show you what it looks like. Here's the top with the cute little matryoshka. And then here's the palm and thumb. This waist yarn is so that I can make it convertible, and I totally put the waist yarn in too early. It should be up here, but that's okay. I'll manage. Anyway, so there's that. And this is a free pattern on Ravelry, which is why you can see the chart. And I thought I would mention that for me, one of my essential colorwork knitting tools is an application called JKnit Lite. It's free, but unfortunately it only works on iPhones and iPads, those kinds of things, not Android. But in case that's useful to you, it's spelled JKNITLITE. And what it does is it allows you to import any PDF, and then you can have this highlight bar and you can change its size right here. You can change the orientation of your chart. And then once you have it in place, all you do is double tap and it moves it up and down. So it's very easy to see what row you're on if, like me, you prefer not to print your patterns. So in this case, I am knitting on 9-inch circulars. That is not usual for me. I only have one set of 9-inch circulars in size 2, and that happened to be the size that I decided the mitten would look good on. So I decided to use these instead of double points, which are my usual small diameter knitting option, because when you're knitting in stranded color work, it's easier to keep your tension even if you don't have to worry about joins. And with double points or magic loop or 2 circulars, you're always having at minimum 2 joins. So the tiny circulars, if you can manage them, eliminate that problem so you don't have to worry so much about what your floats are doing. And let's see, what else should I say? So this chart is really wonderful because it has the graph, instead of all the lines being the same, every 5 boxes, both horizontally and vertically, the line is darker, larger, I suppose. So that makes it much easier to track where you are because you only have to count to 5. And she has also centered the chart so that the 2 center stitches are divided by one of the bold lines. So what I've done is stitch markers that match up with that. So I have 1 stitch marker at the beginning of the round, of course. Then I have 1 at the middle, which lines up right here. Then I have 1 at the end of the chart, which is right here. And then since the palm is just alternating the entire way, I don't have any stitch markers on there because I don't need to track that. It's hard to get off track. The purple yarn is waist yarn because that's where my thumb is going to go. So in case you're wondering, that's not anything to do with the stranded color work. Okay, so I think that's everything you need to know about my tools. I'm a big fan of stitch markers because that way if you miscount, you realize it much earlier in your knitting. So I always have at least a few stitch markers with stranded color work. I find it saves me time. Oh, I should show you how I did that, huh? So I hold 1 color in each hand. That's the way that I find most comfortable. I am a dominant continental knitter. That's how I learned to knit. But after about a year of knitting, maybe a year and a half, I also taught myself to do English knitting, and so I'll do projects where I knit English style as well so that I'm comfortable knitting with both hands. And I originally did that so that I would find 2-handed color stranded work easier. So if you're having issues doing it with 2 colors because you've only ever knit one way, I would suggest picking a plain stockinette project that you can do as warm-up with whatever hand is not your dominant hand. Of course, that takes more patience and time, but that's what I did. So I almost always have my background in my right hand, and that is because whatever color you hold in your left hand is going to pop more from the mitten because the stitches end up a little larger, and you can really see that on the stripes. So this is not a tension issue. There's no puckering. It's just that the charcoal gray stitches are all a little bigger. They have a little more yarn in them. I just shouldn't mess with the focus, should I? We'll just leave everything on the table. You can see it from here. Okay, so the charcoal stitches are all a little bigger. Here that's more of a tension issue, but down here it's not. I haven't blocked this yet either, but so usually you hold the color that's making the design so that it will be dominant, because that makes your design read more clearly. Sometimes you might want it the other way around, but okay, so background for me is in my right hand, and there are all kinds of ways to tension yarn English style knitting. This is how I do it. So my ring finger goes under and around, and then my pointer finger goes under and around, and I do it because I flick, so that's the motion I make when I'm doing English style excuse me, knitting. I pulled all that yarn out so that I wouldn't have to stop and yank yarn while I was knitting. And then for continental knitting, I tend to be a very loose knitter, and I don't want to have to clamp my fingers down, so I wrap a lot to put some tension on the yarn. So I wrap twice around my pinky, and then depending on the project I'm doing, either 2 or 3 times around my pointer. I'm doing 3 times for this because I'm naturally a little bit of a tighter knitter with my right hand than my left hand, so I have to snug up my left hand to make sure my tension is even. Okay, so I'm going to do the last stitch of the previous round and slip my stitch marker. And now we're following this chart. Black or charcoal gray. We'll just call it black for ease. And I knit that, and then I've got one blue, so I flick that. And 1, 2, 3, 4, and then, so because that's a long ways, I guess I just do it, at this point I've been doing color knitting for long enough that I can do it without thinking too hard, but basically as I'm wrapping for that blue, I'm making sure that there's yarn in the back, and that's going to be your float. See there? If you snug that up too tight, like that, you're going to get puckering. See how that kind of drew it? And that's one of those things where when I first began stranded knitting, I would stop and spread my stitches out pretty much every time, just to make sure that I wasn't getting any puckering. And as your hands get more used to it, you don't have to consciously stop and spread it out so much. But that is definitely what I did the first time. And 2 blue, and then the 4 black. You should also know that I don't usually knit on these tiny circulars. These are 9-inch circulars, so if my knitting looks a little bit awkward, it's because I am not used to knitting on these. But I do think that when you're doing stranded color work, it's much easier to tension your yarn when you're just knitting on a circular needle around and around. And that is how I did one row. I am going to start a new clip because my camera can only do so much, and then I'll show you the back because I'm just alternating stitches there, so that might be a little more useful. The regular way that I strand across the back, which is just 1 by 1, and I've noticed when I'm just doing continental style knitting, I'll keep the yarn up closer to the front, but when I'm doing 2-color knitting, I keep the yarn further back, and then when I need it, I rock my pointer finger forward. And I didn't learn that consciously. It must have just been the solution my hands decided on. Sorry, my yarn is tangled. But I thought I would share it just in case, wow, the yarn is rebelling, just in case it helps one of you who are trying to figure out how to knit both ways at once. So hopefully You can see that. I'm going to zoom in, well, crop while I'm editing, so that you can see better what's going on. So now I am at a round where, I'm not sure if you can see on the chart, but there are some longer floats. I'm going to be doing 6 stitches of the black before I get to do the blue. And so that gives me a chance to show you how I catch my work. I know that some people who knit stranded color work catch their floats every 2 or 3 stitches. I don't do that. I think both ways are great. I just, I don't know, I have never felt the need to. But once they go over 5 to 7 stitches, then I catch them, and I'll catch them more frequently depending on what I'm knitting. Since these are mittens, so I'm going to be putting my fingers inside them, I definitely want to catch in the middle of the 6th stitch. So here's what I do. So I've knit 3 of the black, and what I'm going to do here is sometimes when you catch the float, it can show through a little. So if there's an option, I'll catch it on a stitch that is the same color as whatever one is the float on the previous round. So even though that is kind of weird because I'm catching it at stitch 5 and then I'm going to knit at stitch 7, that's still what I'm going to do. Okay, and this is the trickier one, to catch the background floats. Usually you don't have to do this one as frequently. So first I wrap it as if I'm flicking, as if I'm going to knit with blue. Now I put my needle behind the black yarn as if I'm going to knit with the black yarn. Then I move the blue yarn back out of the way, and see that's twisted the yarn in the back. And so then I can knit that stitch black, and the blue yarn is under instead of over for that stitch. So that's how a float is caught. And then I need one more black. Don't worry, I'll show it again. And then 4 blue. I don't bother catching when it's just 4 in a row. And then I'm going to do the same thing here where I'm going to catch it under the one that's already blue. So wrap it as if I'm going to knit, right? If I were going to knit, all I would do is pull it through. But don't pull it through, just wrap it. Now pull this as if you're going to knit the normal way. And if I were to pull through right now, I've got both colors, so that's not going to work either. So pull through, and then you unwrap the blue. And as you can see, because my black yarn is now where it is, it ends up twisting it. And that's what you want. Oh, I've got some vegetable matter in my yarn. There we go. Got most of it out. And now that float is caught, and so it won't be so long on the back, and that just helps you maintain even tension, and it means that when you're putting the mittens on, your fingers won't have these really long floats. And so now I'm one more row up, and it's 2, 2, and then a really long stretch of black. So in this case, I'm still going to have to catch my floats twice. So I'm going to go ahead and put the first catch, and you don't want to catch them at the same point 2 rounds in a row. You want to vary which stitch you're catching your floats behind. So I caught it, I think, behind here before, so I'm going to catch a little bit earlier. And let me show you again. You do a wrap, and see my middle finger is kind of helping the yarn sort out, so that's what I do because I've just found it speeds up. But I'll do the other one regular style so that you can see what I'm doing. Okay. And then I'm going to catch my other float here because I prefer to catch floats if there's the option in the stitch where it was before, because then I don't have to worry about it showing through. Okay, so wrap around as if I'm going to knit with the background color, then get the foreground color on my needle, unwrap the background color, whoops, I'm trying to do it fast now. Wrap the background color, put the foreground color on your needle, unwrap the background color, and knit. And that twists the yarn. And what I do, like with this kind of chart, rather than count how many black stitches, I know that I need to go until I'm 1 stitch earlier than where the black stopped last time. So that's another way that I can sort of speed up the project. Now, since this was such a long float, I just like to double check and look back, and yep, that strand looks pretty nice. It's not super loose, but it's not tight either. So now I'm going to keep going, and I've got 1 more blue, 2 more blacks, and a blue. So I hope that that was helpful. I realized that with the 9-inch circulars, my fingers might have been obscuring some of the things going on. So I can try to film with double points or just a larger circular needle the next time I'm doing a project that requires those. But yeah, that is how I do two-handed color work. And it was definitely a challenge at first, but my hands figured out what they were doing, and now this is just as relaxing to me as stockinette in the round. Not on the 9-inch circulars, but generally. And so if you persist, you too will come to really enjoy stranded color work. And, you know, feel free to try out all kinds of different methods. So, happy knitting, and I will see you soon. Bye!